Today, I'm going to be talking about Sitecore AI's new personalization capabilities. I don't see a lot of content out on the web currently on these capabilities, other than the same. I've been creating some videos on this stuff. So some of this is pretty cool. I do think some of this is still in progress of being worked on, or it's kind of like they're iterating on it. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. For those that don't know who I am, Dylan Young, solution architect at Velir. I've been there for just over a year and a half, I think I'm at right now. And I've been in the Sitecore community for over 10 years now. Seven of those years I've been an MVP. And there's some links there. I post quite often on my blog, and then I also actively release video content. So our topic today, like I said, is talking about Sitecore AI specific personalization capabilities. I'll do a brief overview where I talk a little bit about XM Cloud and where these things come from, like the old Personalize and things like that. And then I'll be covering thereafter on some of these capabilities specifically. So how you create rules and conditions within Sitecore AI. This feature existed inside Sitecore Personalize. I actually, ironically, have created a video on how to do it in Sitecore Personalize and a video on how to do it in Sitecore AI. So when you're creating these rules, you're creating them directly for Sitecore AI specifically. And I'll show kind of what that looks like. And then I'm going to cover component level personalization. This was probably the one I thought was still in the works, but I saw that they released some bug fixes recently, so can show some of that as well. I'll talk a little bit about page level personalization with that and why you might want to use component level versus page level, kind of compare the two options that are available. And then affinities and behavioral personalization. This is probably the coolest feature of Sitecore AI's personalization capabilities. I think it's the most powerful. It combines what used to be multiple products into one Sitecore AI product. And then don't know what I was writing there, but dashboards and profiles, and I'll cover audiences as well. I created this deck a few weeks ago, and in that time, audiences came out. So I'll cover where that's at inside the Sitecore AI environment. And as I go through these, I'm going to kind of demo as I go a few of these different things. So that'll be helpful to see it. So let's go to the overview. I'll thank Claude for helping me create this deck because it looks like it created it, in my opinion. But so with the existing Sitecore XM Cloud personalization, it was very limited what you could do out of the box with just XM Cloud. You have page level personalization, but it had some limitations that I'll cover here in a second when I talk about page level versus component level personalization. And in a lot of cases, you had to layer on Sitecore Personalize to buy another license to get access to a lot of what I'm covering today, or some of that wasn't even available back then. So how has this changed with Sitecore AI personalization? You still have page level personalization, that same kind of flow where you trigger. I'll show this a little bit in a demo. But now you have this component level personalization I was mentioning, and it's triggered a different way. This is probably more like XP, but a little different than XP in a way as well. You also have the ability to create custom rules, so you don't have to go and buy Personalize to now create custom rules in Sitecore AI. You can just go and create them, and then you can use those in your page level or component level personalizations. You have deeper profiles. They call them profiles versus guests, or I guess it was called guests in CDP. And what's great is you don't need a CDP license to access this and view all your profiles that you would have needed CDP to use in the past. I say new dashboards, but they're really just you're bringing in CDP's dashboards. So again, you don't need a license to CDP; you just have it. Um, and then the behavioral personalization, this, like I said, is one of the cooler things that's available. And to achieve this in prior XM Cloud, you needed search, you needed CDP, and you needed Personalize as well as XM Cloud. So all those four products are now just one capability. That's pretty cool and pretty easy to use, I think, as well. But some honest takeaways, I mentioned this a little bit. It still seems a little buggy in places, although it seems like it's already gotten a little bit better. Documentation doesn't match in a few cases. When you're writing conditions, the conditions documentation still matches Sitecore Personalizes way of creating those conditions. They're very similar, but they're not quite the same. So hopefully they're. I just checked yesterday, I think it was, and it's still like that. So something to call out. In terms of like getting these capabilities, from my understanding, is that you elect to get Sitecore AI's full kind of. It's kind of like a shift that you make, and as soon as you do that, you lose access to CDP and Personalize in your environment. So for Velir Sandbox, we lost access to CDP and Personalize. And so I don't know what their plans are. I did ask one of the PMs, and they sounded like they were going to do some sort of migration at some point, but it can be a little jarring if you have a customer that does that transition, and they might lose access to something as possible. But it brings you into a better ecosystem, a better the Sitecore AI infrastructure is for all of this, all these personalization capabilities is rebuilt on top of Azure. So there's my final verdict is be cautious about this, but I think every month that they have this and they're adding more and more capabilities, like audiences just came out. It's going to just get better and better. Why you'd want to make that shift. All right. So we'll go into creating rules and conditions. So out of the box, you still have the same conditions that you have with XM Cloud. So the same conditions and rules are kind of you can use them synonymously. But so in XM Cloud, you had a bunch of them baked out of the box, but you now with Sitecore AI, you have one additional called affinity-based personalization. We're going to talk about that in a second. I'll show how you configure that and how that's used. But that's the only new rule. But then you can add your own rules. And so there's a new conditions builder. If you ever use the Sitecore Personalize conditions editor, there's definitely been some improvements. The JavaScript that was used in Personalize was kind of outdated, and there's definitely been some improvements in terms of a more modern version of JavaScript being used. And you can still use AI to create your conditions. From my understanding, you need the kind of you need the agentic studio enabled in order to do that, or at least that's the impression I've got. That was one feature I couldn't use the last time I tried, but I haven't tried recently. So, all right. So with that, let's take a look at a demo. We'll just jump in and take a look at how you edit these conditions. All right. Probably gonna need to be refreshed. All right, so we're in Sitecore AI. We're in the kind of the main landing page. I have a environment set up for this and also for my video, so I'm using the same environment for that. And so to edit a condition, it's kind of a way to get to the page. You can either go directly to the URL, which is something I often do. But another way is to go through Page Builder. So if you go to page builder, there's kind of two different ways to get to that interface where you can edit them. I'll switch to the correct site here. And so the two ways is using either page level personalization or component level personalization. I think using component is probably the easiest way to get there. I'll just go to a random page here. Maybe demos. Why is not give me? There. I don't know why it wasn't giving me that kind of shell. But anyways, so to trigger component level personalization, there's this new button that exists once you have a component selected. This kind of hints into the next slides I'll be showing. But this is how you configure component level personalization. But when you go ahead and you create a new table and you specify a condition, it gives you an option to create new. So I'll click that option. And then it takes you to this personalized conditions page. And so this is kind of very similar UI to that you had for Personalize, but it's all within Sitecore AI. And so this shows you your out of the box ones like you had before. You can actually look at these and see, how they were built. You'll notice that there's now the top affinity option that exists. And it's been used 3 times, which probably is all me. But we can also create custom ones. And so I started playing around with one earlier today. Um, and so just some things to call out here is so you create this condition. Once you're done and you've tested it, you'll publish it, and then it will be available for you to select either in page level personalization or with the component level personalization. But some differences in the interface that's important to call out is first, the left-hand column is where the AI code assistant would show up if you had it enabled. I'm in a sandbox that doesn't have Agentic Studio in it, so it doesn't show up here. I do have access to a sandbox that does, but I don't want to switch over to it. And then one other thing to kind of call out is just the differences in code. And so one thing here is you notice that I use a console.log. I know that sounds not that impressive, but in the old Sitecore Personalize, you would use print statements in order to output your anything you wanted to test. Some other differences is I feel like the IntelliSense is a little bit better. So profile is now what you use instead of guest, like I had mentioned before. So you might get it back, come back. You might do something like that. So it just the nuances are different. So if you've written some old ones and now you want to convert it to Sitecore AI, you just would make sure that you replace the appropriate things. I'm going to guess that also, there was some. It was based. The Sitecore Personalizes conditions were based on an older version of JavaScript, like I mentioned. So you didn't have access to some of the more modern array type functions and things like that. So I would imagine that some of those are available now that weren't in the past. So that's pretty much it for that. I won't go through this because I don't know if it actually works or not, but I don't want to find out. So let's jump back to the deck and we'll continue on. So, I always forget what this option is. We'll just do this. All right. And flip it. All right, so back to this, and we'll continue on. So next up is component level personalization. So to just break this down into why you might want to choose one versus the other, the biggest issue of page-based personalization was the limits on what you could do with them. The biggest obvious one was, well, to step back a little bit, what is page-based personalization? It's basically where you create an audience for your page. This could be, I want to see all users that are in Florida that, live in a specific zip code. That's a very weird scenario, um, but if you had that use case, you could only do up to 8 of those audiences. So if you wanted to do every state, for example, you couldn't do that easily with page level personalization. So it was a real limitation. It allowed for very basic use cases where you could achieve those scenarios. But now with component based personalization, you have a lot more flexibility with what you configure. The only caveat, and I got this question the last time, is I don't know if this, I would assume this works from a performance perspective pretty well. It's just, it's a lot of rules that they allow now. So, and I'll cover this a little bit in a bit, but the rules are basically the rows, and then the columns are kind of classifications that you can make per row, and then you can apply this to 100 components, I assume, on a page. So you could really build out pretty much any scenario that you want. If you had 100 rules, then you could have 100. That fits all 50 states basically. So, um, so that's basically the reason why you might want to choose component-based personalization over page-based. So just the interface, we saw this a glimpse earlier. You can trigger it, and then once you trigger it, you can set, like I said, these are the rows, and so you can have 100 rows here, and then you add these columns. This is one column. You can add another column. So you could say if the user is in a specific country, I know this was actually the bug I had noticed before, is that it only lets you set true or false. But now it lets you set custom values and things like that. But if you said you were in a specific country and then you wanted another column on that, like maybe their affinity scores. So if somebody is in a specific affinity in a specific country, then you could have rules like that. So initial takeaways, not the most intuitive, although I think it's gotten better because it doesn't behave quite. It was buggy, like I said before, so now it's not so much. And so that was the other complaint. Didn't behave as I expected. I could only set true or false, so it didn't really make sense for a lot of the columns. But it seems like that's working better now. And like I said, it's probably going to be the better option than page level personalization. Although I think page level personalization still has its purpose in place. I think it's simpler. If you just wanted a simple personalization on a page, might be just easier to do page level. All right, on to the more fun and interesting one. I've done full presentations about behavioral personalization before, but just to describe what it is, it's about getting these signals from your pages or from search queries, typically for anonymous users, but you could theoretically get these for even known users that are on your site, and you're basically using these different signals from pages that they're looking at, or maybe a query or things that they're looking for. You can kind of helps you detect trends that they might be interested in, or intentions that they might have, or where in the buying cycle they might be. You can kind of sense these things using that. And so in the XP world, we had pattern and profile cards. But now with Sitecore AI, we have affinity scores. And like I said, this did exist in the past with Sitecore XM Cloud. You could Sitecore Search had affinity scores inside of it, and so you could pull that out, but it was all custom. So, and you also had to have Sitecore Search, you had to have Sitecore Personalize to create the custom conditions to do it, and in some cases, you need a CDP as well to do essentially now what's all possible with Sitecore AI. And just to describe what are affinities, it's kind of like a way to achieve behavioral personalization. And it's essentially an affinity towards a topic. Like it's kind of a way that you tag your pages. And we're going to walk through one of those use cases here in a second. But you tag a name and a value pair essentially to a page. And then that allows when somebody hits that page, it scores to the user's profile that they have an affinity towards those values. So over time, if somebody's looking at different models of an SUV, you could tag each of the model's pages to SUVs as a product type or product category equals SUVs, and just it's a very simple explanation, but that would allow you to then know a little bit more about that user. There's other use cases where it would be maybe know on the intent of the user of what based on what pages they're looking at. So let's look at this in action. All right, so this one's a little complicated to get to, or it took me a while to figure out where it was, or you'd find it and then you didn't know where to find it again. So I will say this, the best place to go if you're looking for any of the personalization capabilities is to go to the performance tab, because this is pretty much where they're all at. They're just, some of them are more hidden than others. So we'll talk about profiles and audiences here in a second. This is also the dashboards that I will show a screenshot for, but this is how you access them via the performance tab. But the affinity stuff is down here in settings. And there's actually a few other things I'm not talking about today. The identity rules is one, and then there's all this profile import stuff. This is batch API, it looks like. I think that's new since the last time when I created this deck. So I'll maybe add it at some point. And then there's also the ability to data lake export to Fabric. I haven't tried that yet, but curious to see how it works. But the option we're going to look at is affinities. And so what it does is it loads up essentially all your sites and allows you to kind of navigate through these. So I have video series is the site I was working on. And we'll take a look at speakers, or actually headphones. Let's do headphones. And you'll see that I've set the affinity name of product type to headphones. So these are kind of like sub-nested pages that I'm setting to the kind of parent item. So that way, if somebody goes to wired or they go to wireless, they'll be identified as interested in headphones as a generalization. So it's not the best example in the world, but there's a lot of other use cases where this would make sense. And you can add more than one affinity. You can even add more than one value too. So you might have product type, and you could even have like product color, for example. An interesting one that I remember from Sitecore was the developer portal. They had Sitecore search enabled on it, and the affinities would be, blogs versus videos versus case studies versus. And so as the user navigated around, they would, you'd have an affinity towards a specific type of content type that you're interested in ingesting. So some people prefer videos more, some people prefer reading blogs. That would be kind of a way to determine the intent of the user from that. So once you've set those, you probably want to personalize based on those. And so that's what we'll do next. So let's go back to the page builder. And I'll switch back to the right site, not show Dan Solovey's site. And what we could do is there's a couple different options. We could use page level personalization. Remember the conditions, they're kind of global, so they can apply to page level personalization or they can apply to component level personalization. I think I set these up under page level. So to trigger page level personalization, you still use this little personalize button up here at the top. And that shows essentially then your audiences along the side. So I've created a audience for headphone affinity. So somebody that's interested in headphones would come to this item. And then what I can do is view that audience, and I can build, I think this. Yeah. So basically I'll walk through that condition again. Let's do out of the box. And so down here is that personalization rule or condition or whatever you want to call it. For XP folks, I'll call it a personalization rule. And you can add this to the page. And then this is where you set the value. So we had product type is the type of name for the affinity. And then you can set this to a value. So basically the way this works is it's a audience that you're configuring for page level personalization. If the user is affinity towards headphones, then you'll show a customized homepage is the thought here. So you might show like more headphones across the homepage, just because their affinity is towards headphones. I think that's pretty much it. Maybe I'll quickly glance because I didn't really cover it before. And I'll just wing this one. Just show what the component-based personalization looks like. And so we didn't really go deep into it, but so essentially you create a new table. You have the option to create it for a condition. You can create custom value, or you can do profile data. I'm actually just going to do profile data. And, don't know a lot of stuff in this tenant, but country. And so that's what that first column is. You're just selecting what the first attribute is. And then you can, for each row, you can configure, there's a lot more options that weren't here before, but you could say starts with, and then you could provide, US or whatever in here. And then I believe you save it. It's been a while since I looked at this. Yeah, and then you select the one that you want, and then you can set and assign. You can assign the. I don't remember exactly how it works, but basically you assign it a new data source so that you can make changes to it. I might have done that for you. All right, let's jump back to the rest of the deck here. What I hate about these types of presentations where you have to keep changing, going in and out. But all right, so actually one back. So we're all right. So with that done, we're going to talk about dashboards, profiles, and technically I'll talk about audiences as well. So the performance tab, I already showed it. So you go to that tab and essentially you have access to all the dashboards. I'm not exactly sure which ones are new. I think a few of them have been added since Sitecore AI was announced at Symposium last year. Because some of these are very specific to CDP functionality. And I think they do plan on adding more of these if they haven't got them all released. So if it's not clear, Sitecore AI's personalization capabilities, they are slowly taking the capabilities of Personalize and CDP and rolling them into Sitecore AI. So they just did audiences. That was definitely a CDP feature that now is just part of this. There is, I've heard talk about, other capabilities that are coming into the product as well. And probably by Symposium, it seems like they'll probably have most things in there. The other new feature, which I'll probably show this as well, is the profiles. This reminds me a lot of XP's experience analytics. Kind of, I don't know, something about this card reminds me of it. But yeah, you have essentially a full view of your profile, of each of the profiles, the information on the profiles. You can kind of see all it reminds me a lot also of CDP and Personalize. Of you can also look at all the events that you're getting and things like that, and we'll walk through those. You can also see their top affinities, so it's tracking that stuff. Once you found yourself, and there's a way to do that, you could see how you're triggering those affinities as well. All right, and that's the end. But like I said, let me just quickly bounce back to here. Bounce back out of Page Builder and into the Performance tab just to show profiles first. So it's got this new view. I didn't show this screen, but it's basically additional analytics on your data that you're collecting. But we can jump into this. This is definitely me. So that anybody else is coming from Florida, but you can see that I don't have any affinities for this user, but you can see it's essentially a profile. We can go into engagement. Now we can see, the different pages I was hitting, the different events that I was hitting. So very CDP-esque. Any, data extensions, I guess, logs, Sitecore context, etc. Yep. And then audiences, I was playing around with this morning. Pretty straightforward. If you ever use the audience builder in CDP, you basically take different profile values, sessions, events, etc., or traits, and you build up conditions that make up that audience, and then you can use this audience in other places. I'm not exactly sure where the audience is used yet. I assume there'll be personalization conditions for that at some point. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's good. So yeah, if there's any questions, that's not what I wanted. I'll take questions. If there is. And I didn't cover, I mentioned I created videos on some of these. I haven't covered component level personalization yet. That's probably the next video to come out. So where I go deeper into like creating more rules and scenarios. So
Perfect, Dylan. I did see your new video series. They're pretty good.
awesome. Yeah.
Welcome back.
Yeah, they'll take longer to produce, but
I know.
and go ahead. Sorry.